start off today's session. So today's session is basically, tonight's session is I'm going to be doing a bit of a spiel on the importance, one of the important fundamentals of art fundamentals of composition, which does link with perspective drawing. So we're going to be doing the two together. And then what we're going to be doing is you're just going to go back to working on task 2. But building into that, I also want to go again through brainstorming, and there's a few other bits and pieces, okay? So before, I think the first thing we're going to start with, I just actually want to start with brainstorming, weirdly enough. Just because I want to make sure you understand mind maps properly. Are you okay with this? Okay, so when you do, I'm just running through it as a quick exercise. When we do mind maps, we come up with our topic. So I'm going to go bird. You might all know this. Some people get stuck at this. And then it's a case of the who, what, why. Okay, so you could go who. Okay, well, what types of birds? What types of birds? I might do a seagull. I might do a peacock. And then you might say, okay, so where? Where would that be? On a beach. Where would that be? In a park. You might say, then you might go on and go, oh, you know, there's water, landscape, shells. And do you see what I mean? It's actually, you're just letting it flow from one to the other without too much thought. It's called a word association. So that's what you're going to remember. So bird, so I thought of a bird. So what? A seagull. So where? On the beach. And then, you know, you can say what's on the beach. You can say time of day. You could say, you might go bird night. I might write night. And then I might add from that owl. And then I might put the owl sitting in a tree, in a nest. From the nest, there might be eggs in the nest. From the eggs, they might be blue in colour. You can start also adding in there. You might say shells. You might put acrylic. You might put detail. You can put as much as you want. And I hope that is just a little thing that gives some more clarity. What do you think? Do you feel?
Yeah.
Because I think that could have been a sticking point for some of you, because I keep saying brainstorm, brainstorm, put it in your book. You need to think of it that way, word association. So it's your original thought process. So for example, can one of you give me something you're working on? Thing. Yours, what was yours again?
Wave.
What did you say?
Wave.
Yeah, so you might say wave. And what would you put? Where's a wave found?
The beach.
The beach. Ocean. You know, you can start doing that beach, then you can add in, you could say sunrise. All that, and it can bring in colours. You can write in blues, sunset colours, and it starts to build this overall picture. And then these words can then be researched, and you can find a picture of a peacock, a seagull, examples of sunsets, sunrises, and that builds then your references and your resources in your inspiration parts. Happy with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any questions? No. All right. So let's move on to the next thing. You asked me about composition. What do you understand about composition when it comes to creating a painting? What is composition? If you defined it.
It's the way that items in the painting are laid out, like that draw your eye, like.
Perfect. Can any of you, why is it important to know about compositions? About having good composition?
So that you can deliver the expression of the subject, object that you're drawing.
To create a balanced artwork, yeah.
To create balance artwork.
Without knowing it, it can feel very random. And the funny thing is, I will tell you that I haven't taught composition for ages. And so it was actually really funny because I naturally use it as an illustrator all the time, but I didn't quite understand then how to teach it. So for me, I had to go off and research this, and this is what happens to us all. But I did a bit of research and I started to think about simple ways to communicate it. There are you can go online and you can Google hundreds of ideas for putting compositions together, and I can show you some of these, but let's just look at some real basics that will help you in your painting unit. So the first one we're going to look at is called center bias. Okay, so center bias, and these are terrible pens. If they don't work, we're going to be going on with the other one. So the fundamentals of center bias are that you're always creating a focal point in your painting. So your focal point might be in the center. So in this one here, in the Lowry picture, it's the tower. But the thing that is also making it center bias is the directional lines, which are caused by perspective. Okay, so that you can see those lines, and they draw the eye to that, so therefore it becomes a focal point. Okay, does everyone understand that?
Yeah.
Okay. So the next one we can look at, another thing though really is also, another thing that makes that center bias is going into colour, is the fact that that's so bold, that strong, dark shape, and everything else is kind of in colours going backwards, but in fact that draws your eye directly to it because it's so strong and so bold. So the contrast is really strong. So the next one I would look at is something called background, midground, foreground. So that one is center bias. And then we got background, so we're always saying background, midground, foreground. So these are the rules I use with illustration, which can be basically used in photography and anything else you want to use. So with background, foreground, midground, imagine you're painting a bit like a theatrical set. Obviously the background is the backdrop, the midground are your props, and the foreground are the characters standing at the front. I'm going to see whether I've got it on here. Okay, here we go. So this kind of explains it, middle ground, there we go. So your background is going to be the hills in the distance, let's say. And there's a volcano. And that's my background. Now my middle ground, so for this one, there's your hills. Now the middle ground, here you can see that whole section is where I've gone in and I've started to put some trees. Here's some trees, just like they've done. Created some trees, and there's a bit of a pond in there, and that's my middle ground. And then my foreground can be a number of things. It can be, so this looks like a photograph though, but I'll tell you how to make it look effective as well. So the foreground is all these bright coloured plants, and that's my foreground. But your foreground can be that you've placed a person in the foreground, strong. Now with this background, middle ground, foreground, you can make it really effective as well by deciding what you want attention drawn onto. And I think with this one, really your focal point is going to be your foreground. And your foreground, if I was going to turn that into a painting, I'd be really pushing those warm colours that jump forward with the floral, and I'd probably put a lot more detail into them. And as I step back, I start to probably, so these would be very blurred, it would all be blues, and then this would be expressive, but it would almost be like, you imagine you're just taking back the strength of everything. This is refined and detailed, this is slightly blurred and more expressive, and that in the background is just beautifully blurred out in a hazy kind of tonal effect. Do you understand that? So that's another option, especially with landscapes, okay? Okay, number 3. So number 3 is basically moving on from this, and probably works with this quite well, that idea. I'm just going to rub these out. The next one is one I use a lot of, which is basically we've got to build just the focal point. So we keep talking about focal point, but this is when you want one thing really focused in. So the first one with focal point is contrast. And we're going to look at contrast. So when we define contrast, that can be black against white, light against dark, that sort of thing. So here's two examples. I've got a nice silhouette, and in the background there's the horizon line, and then I've got a little dude, and he's got his little knife, and he's in the background, right? And then in the foreground, I've got the side face, someone looking in on him, ready to fight, or whatever. So, with contrast, what would happen if you, so you've got two, they're exactly the same. But we're talking contrast here of light and dark. There's the same picture. Okay, so option one is where this foreground figure becomes the focal point. So this is where you're going to maybe use the warm tones, sharpen up the image, all that sort of stuff. And in the background, you add more into your paint. You're going to add more of the shade, the black, and shade it back and mute it down and desaturate it more. So all the colours become a bit more blurred. So then, it's still there, it's still a narrative happening, but this figure has the light on it. This is the one the story or the painting needs to be really focusing in on. And then you do the opposite. So then this way, you can imagine that you're going to paint it where this figure is in the nice warm, can you see that over there? This figure's in the nice warm tones. You've done a kind of spotlight effect. And all the surrounds, the figure is still there, but all the surrounds are quite dark and subdued, and there's more tints added to it. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's again another way. And what the composition is doing, before you do this in your thumbnails, you've got to decide, as well as the theme and knowing what you're doing, you're deciding on what am I wanting to convey? What message? I'm not just doing a picture of a plant or a feather or anything like that anymore. I have the power through painting to have a voice. And so you can draw the viewer to certain aspects of your painting to make it really powerful. You can make, through good composition, a painting feel uncomfortable and a painting feel like a celebration, okay? So that is focal point contrast, but then we have focal point blur. And it's pretty much similar to what I just said there. Focal point blur. So I've kind of made these up because the other ones are too highbrow. It's based on them there, don't worry. So focal point blur is more based on, you've got this figure, and obviously the foreground figure, you can blur it. So it's all blurred, and then the background, this guy's really clear. Sorry about my drawings not being that great on this. And then you've got the same thing where you can have the foreground figure looking really sharp and detailed, and then the background figure is all blurred and the lines aren't clear. Okay, so it's blurred. Do you see what I mean? So bringing the highlight onto it. You can combine the two as well if you want to really reinforce bringing your focal point to certain areas within the picture. Any questions? No? Okay. So let's look at something else. Let's look at a symmetry. So you want your painting to feel slightly uncomfortable. So obviously we've got the old idea of symmetry where you put your focal point in the middle, but then you've got this other concept of not only bringing your figure off to the side, tipping it as well. So as if you've got a camera, it just makes everything feel a little bit uncomfortable. I mean, I'm talking about this sort of thing is used in visual graphic novels and stuff, but just by changing up the way the camera is seeing something, it can feel slightly more uncomfortable, whether it's a person or something else. You don't have to have everything straight on or flat. You can also change your viewpoint from above or looking up as well. But that's another one. And then of course there's the one that all photographers use, the standard. Have you heard of rule of thirds? Rule of thirds. Yeah. So on cameras nowadays, so everyone being a bit quick. On cameras nowadays, you will find a grid, and you can even get them on your iPhones.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that the rule of thirds?
This is the rule of thirds. Hang on, I've done this bit wrong.
I was going to say, isn't there two?
There's two.
Like 9 boxes?
Yeah. I got excited. So with the rule of thirds, just go over. Hang on. So with the rule of thirds, what it really is, and it says it here, this painting by Shada is, it's basically helping you place objects. If you have a still life, it helps you when you're placing anything with a camera and you're using it and you've got a viewpoint. So, for example, you can decide here, if this is a landscape, you can have more ground or more sky, okay? And you can think about where you place your objects too. So when we look up here, you can see, for example, the objects, the main focal objects should be placed on the areas where the lines intersect. So this is a good example of rule of thirds, okay? So it might be, for example, I'm doing a landscape and I have my hills in the background. It'd be nice if there was a red one. Oh, there it is. And I have my hills in the background. Ooh, it's rather nice. And then I have decided to put a cluster of people here. There's a person. There's a person. Or I can draw, just not easy on here. Looks like I'm on a monitor. So there's some people. There's the background. So we're doing a nice little background. A little bit more to the background there. So it's as simple as that with the rule of thirds. I could even place here, if I wanted to, I might place on this third here, a tree that just intersects beautifully there. And that is just a rule that's been used in graphic design and photography for years to help people balance their compositions, okay? So it's up to you how you do it. But how this can, I'll tell you a really good tip. If you're drawing something from a photograph, there are many things you can do to play with this as well. You can actually, on your iPhone, or your phone, edit, save the picture and edit it, crop it down, do this sort of thing, twist it, see what happens, play with the compositions and then keep printing them out. You don't have to keep drawing them. Then you can sort of see what you can work from, okay? Does that sort of help as well? I mean, if you have Photoshop, you can go to town. I mean, you can blur the background and desaturate. So focal points, and in this as well. This could be a focal point. I could make this tree rich browns and oranges with leaves, and then I want the viewer then to see these secondary. So maybe they would be a bright colour but more muted, and then even more muted and pale in the background. So your eye goes to the tree first, the magic tree, then the gathering underneath, and then into the background. Any questions? Okay, let's have a look at this one.
The grids are kind of good to like upscale things as well.
Oh yeah, for scaling. Yeah, that's a really good one. This slide's a bit blurry, unfortunately, but you can get the concept of it just by looking at it. Well, I know, that's what I mean, painting can be blurry.
Oh, yeah.
All I'm looking at, the reason I threw that in there, I want you to sort of look at that compositionally. I mean, obviously they are the same painting, but they've just changed some things up.
Colours.
Oh, yeah.
So I want you to look at them, I want you all to look at them and sort of think to yourself, what kind of composition is that?
On the left one, I feel like I'm more drawn to the colour of the like autumn tree first,
Yeah.
and then going downwards.
Warm.
Whereas the right side, I feel like I'm starting from like the rock and making my way through up the stream.
Okay, that's really good.
The rule of thirds in this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, rule of
Perfect
thirds.
rule of thirds.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if we go back, you've got the 3 lines here, and then you've got line there, line there. So it's mainly water. So they made the decision that that's 2/3 of it. The background's up higher. And then even this tree is in the other one. So it's a perfect example of rule of thirds, but it's also an example of colour play as well, by putting highly saturated, by changing that tree to a highly saturated autumn colour, your eye is straight away drawn to the orange compared to everything else.
Whereas in that one, they've darkened water at the front. So
Yeah.
there's
So I'd even say, yeah, and so I'd even say when you're doing your wave, I'd like to see you, because you're doing loads and loads of colours, what would happen if you started thinking about this? Could you revisit this and start applying this?
Yeah.
But also, what would happen if you use the blur factor in the background, or you know how you have your wave, and then in the background you blurred off an island or something? Interesting.
Yeah.
And can you sort of see then why thumbnails are important? They are literally used to be able to map this sort of thing out and then experiment with it. Okay, what I want to do, that's just that. I want to get out of this one and show you another one. And show. Where's it gone? Okay, I'm with you. This one is good. This isn't mine, but this might have belonged to, not Naomi, but Anna. Not sure who it belongs to, but it was drawn to my attention. And it is more about drawing, but we're stepping more into thumbnails. So trialing different compositions and seeing which ones work the best. And that's why we do the thumbnails, not to put all the detail in it, is to, and I do this, I haven't got it on me, but I can show you my storyboards are basically thumbnails. And that's what I do. I am thumbnailing the composition, and I'm having to see the page spreads, how they relate to each other across the book and how it moves. So, you know, this dude has basically, or female, has just got a pen and ink, and they probably have all their inspiration images. And what they're doing here is they might be like just trialing some thumbnails from some of the photos that they've done. Just going to go and put this into slideshow. Current slide. Alright, we're ready? Thank you. So, this is a really good one too, because you can just be moving things around.
Anna did do this.
Yeah.
She did.
It was Kimmy who gave it to me. She said, I found these great PowerPoints. I thought, great, because this is Anna did a lot of her own work.
Yeah.
In the Cert 3, and I do a lot of that in my Cert 3, it's the same. So, but I'm loving her work. Personally, I'm liking Anna's resources. So, but what she's shown here, did she show you this slideshow then? So you've seen it. So you have done compositions. So I don't know why you're saying it, or one group did, the other group may not have. But I like this because it is literally showing, trialing things. Oh, let's put the giraffe. Let's zoom in on the giraffe. What about we make the giraffe head bigger and the tree smaller? What about we have 2 there, but what about if we change the viewpoint? And that's what you do as an illustrator. And I think I must admit, Anna must have been a children's book illustrator, because she's working like I do with my
she does.
concepts.
She does.
That's what we do with books. So we do that. We have to look at, I'm drawing multiple ones to try and change the cinematic angle. But you can be looking at this and going, which one out of that is drawing the best attention to the relationship between the mum and the baby or something? And you can go, oh, you know, when I look at it, I think I'm going to do this, but I'm really going to enhance the colours here and blur everything out. Okay? So we've seen this with Anna. And she drew these, which are really nice, testing compositions in different sizes and shapes and orientations on paper. Lovely. Brilliant. This is explaining it even further. And you are relying, you've got those rules that I gave you, but you also are starting to rely on your ability to perceive what works and doesn't work. Okay? This one I think Anna must have, I don't know, is this one of her?
It looks like one of her work.
It might be.
Well, she liked doing her work, so we must think it is. But what she's showing here is an initial sketch to her final, so that must have been one of her thumbnails. And she would have done multiple thumbnails to get to that point and decide that she wants to centre line the moon. I like this because this is, from an illustrator's point of view, she's really captured light really nicely in this. And, you know, what is she using here with regards to the rules we've looked at? Is she looking rule of thirds? No. A little bit. I don't think so.
You got the tree line at the base, like where the base of the tree, so you got.
But
the
where's your
line.
See, my eyes.
And then hills above.
Mine's eyes drawn to that, and I try to
Yeah.
work out maybe it's because there's more orange
I
on
think
it.
she's incorporated a few different composition styles to make this picture.
Yeah, and she's got some really nice textures and line work. Okay, cool. And then she's added in here, I don't know whether she added it in this or Kimmy might have, because it's like they're becoming bish-boshed of lots of people's stuff. But this is again using different, these take it even further with regards to compositions, and I don't want to overwhelm you, but you've got rectangular, radiating line. Well, radiating line is centre bias, it's the same, okay? And everybody calls things different things. Balanced scales, so that I would call, what's it called? When things are completely
Symmetrical.
Yep. You know, and obviously the S1 is just taking the river up there. It's just showing you a few, and then the cross one, yeah, that's a good one too. That's used in a lot of ships. It is used that sort of thing. Or a tree. Got even more thumbnails here. Tunnels, silhouettes. It can get overwhelming. Let's not go too far with it. But that's your elements and principles coming in as well, okay? That's part of it. And what was good in here was she's got good examples of test pieces. And I think you guys kind of are doing that with your test pieces. You're trialling your mediums and you're trialling your compositions, and you're making sure it all works really well, okay? And looking at your colour ranges, okay? I'll get out of that. So that's with regards to composition. Have you got a clearer understanding? Was that a good revision exercise?
Yep.
How do you feel you're going to take it into your own practices?
Yeah, I think I will.
I think I'll probably line up a grid for mine.
Yeah.
Well, I was actually stuck on composition this week because
Yeah.
I was like, I
Well, you
figured
know,
out my
talking.
colours
Yeah.
and my technique, what I wanted, but I wasn't happy with the way it was coming together. So I think, you know, using the grid and the focal thing
And
we
then
talked
just-
about, I can redo some of the, maybe even just make a page of thumbnails.
I
and
think
see
so.
what one works best, because I know the colours and the...
And even in thumbnails, there's no reason why you can't get like a coloured pencil or texture and just be putting in some bits of colour just to sort of see how it offsets. Now I can continue onto perspective now, or we could stop for a bit and then you could do a bit of thumbnailing now if you want, and then I can do perspective. What would you prefer? Would you like to stop and just have a go at thumbnailing for a little bit? Your compositions?
I'm easy.
Oh no, you need to do it.
I'll